Okay, well, here we are, the end of the semester already. Our theme this year has been to take action, so we're going to try to bring it all together. I invited a very special friend and guest tonight to share with you his incredible journey in food, and also really to talk about what I like to think of as the virtuous cycle of edible entrepreneurship. So we're going to talk about how nonprofit and for-profit models can complement each other in food to address this wide spectrum, because all through the year it seems like we've been talking about trade-offs, that we can do something well over here, but then over here it suffers. So tonight I'm going to help you a little bit with reflection to action, because many of you are getting ready to write your papers. And so I wanted to share a few tools that I use to help kind of ground and focus your energy and topics. This is such a wide-ranging course that to get focused on something that's really going to be meaningful to you is what I hope to do. You just heard from Victoria, which is our graduate student spotlight, our special guest, Michel, Nischan. Then we're going to have the course evaluation and a farmer's market for you tonight. But before you get started, you know I like to talk about what's in the news. This week, Beyond Meat is scheduled to go public, one of the early food tech companies to go public. Has anybody had a Beyond Meat burger, or how many people? They claim to have sold 25 million of them to date. I thought this is very interesting. So this is a company. Beyond Meat's a relatively new company. I think it's just about 5-7 years old. It has raised $122 million over those 7 years. It has $88 million in sales at the end of last year. It lost $23 million on those $88 million in sales. But the market, the investors, and the marketplace are valuing the company at $1.2 billion. That's 14 times revenues. So how many people are planning to participate in the IPO? No hands went up. Okay, it's interesting. So I wrote down a few numbers. Nestle. Nestle is the world's largest food company. They have about $100 billion in sales. So like 1,000 times Beyond Meat, right? And last year they had net income of $10 billion, which is about 10%. So the margins are relatively small. And the market cap is $250 billion. So they're valued at 2.5 times revenue, or 25 times earnings, just to put that in perspective. Then I just thought, okay, what the heck? Let's look at Facebook. Facebook had $55 billion in annual revenues last year, net income of $22 million, almost half, with 37% increase in growth. So it's still growing very rapidly. And it has a market cap of $550 billion. So 10 times revenue. So Beyond Meat's going to be valued at 14 times revenue with a loss. And then I just thought, the first food tech company that went public in June of 2017 was Blue Apron. And it was also touted as a unicorn. It was valued at over $1 billion. And when it went public at about $10 a share. And I checked today, it's trading for less than $1 a share. They had sales last year of $140 million, down 25%, a loss of $23 million, and a market cap of $200 million. So maybe 1 point something times revenue. So I wanted to share this with you because we live in a very interesting part of the world where we get a lot of early looks at what's coming. And we also are in the stream of a lot of promotional storytelling. And it's interesting, this week I happened to go to Amy's Organic Drive-Thru in Rohnert Park. Anybody been there? It's awesome. Like, they have the best veggie organic burger I've ever had, under $5. It's amazing. So they're hitting quality, organic, and access. This is their first store, and now they're going to start to open them. But it struck me, like, what is it going to take for a company like Beyond Meat to really break through what I think is going to be a very crowded marketplace? So stay tuned, follow the trends. So just to remind us, this class is all about becoming an enlightened eater. I hope that during the course of the semester, you've had a better chance to kind of wake up and become more self-aware of how your own actions, your own choices, your habits, your conscious and unconscious behaviors are affecting and impacting a much broader system. We've also been trying to develop food systems intelligence, how everything fits together, and to get a sense of the forces that are either bringing us the information or making it opaque for us. We're trying to understand how one thing connects to another. And then finally, and with your final assignment, you're going to design a take-action plan, because we want to put all of this good learning to work, because time is short. As we learned at the beginning of this semester, we really are in a crisis, even though we might not experience it every day, although 94-degree weather in April is kind of interesting. It just points to the uncertainty and the need to adapt quickly. And those of you that have spoken with me privately or one-on-one, you know that I feel that our relationship to food, this really intimate, high-trust relationship that we have to food and the food system, is the pathway, I think, for human beings to really wake up to our opportunity to take action with respect to climate and personal health. You'll remember this graphic from the first class, and I think I've shown it a couple times. Tonight we're going to really focus on how reflection turns into action. One of my students in another class actually came back with a new word, reflect. I thought that was kind of clever. So, I wanted to just kind of run through all these different topics that we've had during the semester to just quickly provoke your memory. I didn't exactly think the slide was going to look like that, but it does. But hopefully these remind you of some of the things that we've been learning. And the context of this systems dance that we're in, and I wanted to highlight the final three that I hope has happened for you this semester: expanding the boundary of caring, celebrating complexity, and holding fast to the goal of goodness. So here's a few keys to reflection. Please pardon my typo. You might want to write these down if you want, but as you think about your paper and you think about the class, what surprised you? What surprised you? What woke you up? I never knew that, or gee, I thought something completely different was true. What inspired you, or who inspired you during the semester? What was it about them that inspired you? What was it about their work or their character or their message? What irritated or frustrated you? The seed of most entrepreneurial innovations, the fuel that gets people to actually start a new company or create something that needs to come into the world, is a frustration that it doesn't exist. It's sometimes they call it scratching an itch that you feel. But most importantly, as you reflect, think about what matters to you. What matters to you? One of my teachers used to say, what has heart and meaning for you? What has heart and meaning for you? So these are questions that you can think on in a quiet moment, and hopefully by kind of integrating and visiting those questions, you might come to this question: what's become clear to me lately? What's become clear to me? What's that aha? That could be the topic of your paper. What's become clear to me lately? How do I fit in making a difference in this food industry? I was thinking about for myself, what's become clear to me lately, and here was a couple of things that I wrote down this morning. Soil matters more than we appreciate. I think throughout the semester, the recurring themes, whether it was Daphne Miller or Bob Kennard or Urvashi. Just throughout the semester, we kept hearing about the really precious quality of soil and how it contributes to human health and what an integral part of our future is, and even how carbon sequestration and soil health go together, and that there's a lot of potential for regenerative agriculture. I also feel like this semester, this became clear to me that diversity encourages flourishing. And I took this picture of this cover crop yesterday, and I thought, in a biological system, the diversity of the different plants is really helping the soil health. I think the diversity of perspectives that we've heard here this semester and the diversity of voices that have come to speak with us in the class have made it richer. And for me, really the most rewarding semester yet. The last thing I think I learned or became clear to me is that information in this very polarized political culture that we're living in right now is complex and politicized, and that it requires us to really scrutinize with rigor to get the full picture. We can't rely on memes and snippets and trolls and characters that are, effectively professional disinformationalists. And I think the food movement, the food system suffers in the same way. I Googled the other day, New Green Deal, and all of a sudden I saw just like an explosion of different perspectives, and made it, almost exhausting to try to figure out, what is this about? So it's going to take real effort and concentration to get through. So hopefully with those keys, you can think about reflection, you can get this essay, you can bring it to action. And if you need help, all of the teaching assistants have given you time. And I just want to thank all of you for being so present in this class. I feel like the questions that we got from each of you this year, the intensity of your curiosity and inquiry, the thoughtfulness of your questions, your grasp of complex issues, it's really made it a joy for me to lead the way again this year. So I want to thank all the students. I also want to really big thank you to the Haas technology team. We've got 5 incredibly dedicated team members headed up by Eric. It's no small feat to walk in here and organize this in about 10 minutes turnaround time. Our teaching team has been wonderful. You know who they are: Victoria, Fiona, John, and Maria. And I also want to thank Alice Waters, and I especially want to thank Hannah Love from the Edible Schoolyard Project. They all make it possible. Those were Victoria's slides. And now I'd like to introduce to you our guest speaker tonight, a dear friend, a teacher to me, an inspiration. As I mentioned, I think about the defining principles of the Haas School, about questioning the status quo, going beyond yourself, exuding confidence yet without attitude, so a deep sense of humility about knowing what you don't know, and always being a student, always learning, no matter how old you are or what stage of your career you're in. And I couldn't think of anyone that more embodied those principles in the real world in everyday life than Michel Nischan. And one of the things that's amazing about Michel, this is one of my favorite photos of him, is that he travels in this really interesting network of overlapping communities, and he commands such amazing respect from each of those constituents. And I think that in today's day and age of standing in integrity in what you believe in and what you commit yourself to do, and retain the respect and the credibility with really diverse stakeholders, that's not an easy thing to do. That's not easy for corporate executives to do. It's not easy for entrepreneurs to do. It's not easy for politicians to do. But Michel has an incredible following and loyalty just in the food business, the chef world. He's received the James Beard Award, which is the really highest honor for people in the culinary arts, 4 times for different things. He is the co-founder and champion of one of the most really impressive and important organizations, Wholesome Wave, that has focused on access and affordability and health and education for a lot of people that are effectively disenfranchised from the good food that many of us get to enjoy. And now I've had the pleasure of working with him, kind of being a little whisperer in his ear as he gets ready to launch his newest venture, which is called Wholesome Crave. So please, all the way from the East Coast, just to see you tonight, please give a warm welcome to Michel Nischan.
Wow, thank you. Will says that he's learned from me, so I have to caution you all anything that you've learned from him, if he's truly learned anything from me. Anyway, it's funny because I call myself a default enlightened eater. I was lucky to be born into it. Both of my parents were farmers. Some of you probably know this background about me, but I really learned about good food just by working on a farm. And to me, it was just normal to know what a ripe tomato was and what a fresh cucumber was and what a really fresh herb tasted. It was normal. It was normal. My mom packed all of our lunches in bags when we went to school. We really didn't encounter a lot of the food system things until I became a chef as a default defense mechanism. When I worked on my grandfather's farm, it was for full summer, so we learned how to raise plants from scratch, take them all the way to gestation and fruit, raise and steward animals, responsibly steward their passing, and then turn all of that stuff into delicious stuff. Every one of my aunts and uncles were really great cooks. So I became a chef, and then I had my first opportunity to really kind of engage with the food system. And the way it looked to me as a young culinarian were these perfectly round pink tomatoes in the middle of February, coming in the back door of some of the best restaurants in Chicago. This is in 1979, and there are only a few of us in the room that were alive then. But this was our food system at its peak optimization. They were all perfectly round. They were all the exact same size, which seemed to be their reason for existence. It was horrible stuff. So when I became a chef, which I did very easily because I had all of these skills, me and my team said, how do we make it possible for our customers to fall in love with a ripe tomato? We're just going to go out to Oconomowoc, I was in Milwaukee at the time, and find farmers and buy food from them. We found farmers, but they were all growing rice, corn, wheat, soy. So we brought seed catalogs in February, and we sat with them, and we brought them homemade sandwiches and coffee, and did some crop planning, did the economics of the yields that we would need, and then predicted how much money they would need to make it worth their while to grow something that wasn't corn, soy, or oats, water it, and keep it weeded. And we paid them in half in front, and then we would pay the other half when we went to pick it up and pick it ourselves because they couldn't deliver it. This is 1979. So think of the craziness of running a restaurant, scheduling people, getting food in the door, preparing, being ready for service on time. But first you have to go and pick your own food and then bring it back. About 10 years in to that experience, we actually got to a point where farmers started delivering because it was becoming economically viable. We figured out ways that we could work out our menu and our pricing strategy so that we could pay them a premium price for some of the food that they were growing. So I used to put it about 10 years into my career, we could make about 35 phone calls and have 50% of everything in our cooler be local and almost 90% of it be organic from someplace else. And I thought I was doing pretty good. And then I hit what was a second wall in my career. The first wall were those really ugly tomatoes. The second wall was when my son Chris was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that's when I very quickly made the connection between food and human health, not just food and deliciousness, not just food and its impact in our decisions on the farm economy and the environment that's attached to it. So very quickly, my family, we all changed our food philosophy at home, started feeding ourselves differently at home, and it really took like about 3 months for us to figure out that what we were doing at home wasn't reconciling with what I was feeding my customers in the restaurant. Yeah, a lot of it was local, it was organic, but butter, cream, flour, sugar. The science of the time was that fat makes you fat and that processed carbohydrates probably aren't good. So I did a 180 in my career, created a concept called Heartbeat in 1997 in the first W. That was a restaurant of well-being based on local, organic, and sustainable, but no processed food. No cream, no butter, no animal fat, no flour, no sugar, and we had to answer the question, how do you make sauce and how do you make dessert? We succeeded because we got 3 stars in the New York Times, so we figured out how to make sauce and dessert. We got our 3 stars, but then we got 0 stars in the New York Post, got accused of being the food police. So that made us controversial, which made us popular and busy. So I ended up in a bunch of think tanks, Harvard School of Public Health, Harvard Medical School, the Center for Health and the Global Environment, started learning about the public health crisis of type 2 diabetes, but the miracle, potential miracle of its preventability through food, its early stage reversibility through food. You can have early stage type 2 diabetes and actually reverse that condition by changing largely your lifestyle through food. Then I learned about this thing called the social determinants of health. All of those things that prevent people struggling with low income from being able to make the choice to feed their family the food they need to prevent this horrible disease. So social conditions preventing the preventability of a disease that is like a death sentence. That was a wall that I couldn't reconcile. I could do Heartbeat because I had the culinary skills to figure out how to make sauce and dessert without using the ingredients that I had grown up using. I could do that because I could afford to charge my customers $30 for an entree. There's no business plan for the family of 4 that runs out of SNAP or food stamps in the middle of the month and has $2 tonight to spend on dinner for 4 people. It's 50 cents a person. Broccoli's 50 cents or $2 a head. You can have a Rolodex of 1,000 recipes of broccoli in your head, and you can be a block from a grocery store, not be in a food desert, and you're not going to buy broccoli. You're going to buy instant noodles. You're going to buy instant rice. You're going to stir in condensed soup. That's what's for dinner tonight. There was no business plan for that. So I felt that good old Southern Baptist farmer guilt that my mom infused in all of us. Here I was patting myself on the back for feeding people really expensive food, cuisine of well-being, $30 an entree, and then there's the family with $2 to spend on dinner tonight. And I really kind of wanted to quit. And a mentor of mine who is very valuable to me, the late Michael Batterberry, I told him, I'm going to change careers, I'm getting out of food. And he said, no, you can't do that. He said, look at what you've been able to achieve. There's an opportunity that there's this platform where you can collect some allies around figuring out how to take your business acumen and address this barrier that you've run into. So he introduced me to another late mentor of mine, Gus Schumacher, who's a real policy wonk. Spent a lot of time at USDA, Commissioner of Agriculture of Massachusetts, beautiful man. We aligned on these same things. It's like, why does it have to be that someone falls on hard times, they're struggling with low income, but they don't have an opportunity to exercise their right as an American to choose to feed their families well, simply because they can't afford it? So we started working in underserved communities, trying to figure out, we wanted to find out what was the biggest barrier. Was it lack of knowledge? Was it lack of access? It really turned out to be lack of affordability. It's the one fundamental thing that no matter what you know about food, you can have the greatest cultural understanding of what to do with food, how to manipulate it into recipes to please a variety of people that you want to feed. if you can't afford the basic ingredients to provide it for them, it's just never going to become a reality. So we founded Wholesome Wave on the belief that lack of affordability is the only barrier to making healthier food choice. Lack of education or knowledge about certain types of food, that's a challenge that can be overcome if you can afford to. Lack of geographic access is a challenge that can be overcome if you can afford the food once you get to it. But it's actually that lack of affordability. So we started doubling SNAP when spent on fruits and vegetables at farmers markets when it was illegal, got the waivers to make it legal. And in 2014, we're successful getting the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentive Program into the federal Farm Bill. And that's now been doubled in 2018, named after Gus Schumacher. Now I'm gonna get a little choky. Named after Gus, and it's been made permanent in baseline. So it'll be a permanent part of all future farm bills. And you know, we love that. And we did all that on a $5 million a year annual budget, operating in dozens of states. Last year, we reached 970,000 food insecure Americans. And a lot of people say to me, wow, that's a lot. And I say, it's 1/70th of the problem. So, you know, here I'm hitting what I hope is my final barrier in my career. And that's that what I did learn, what I didn't tell you is my last restaurant project, the lease was up on New Year's Eve 2013 was our last day. We knew Finney was going to happen in the Farm Bill. I devoted 100% of my life to nothing but Wholesome Wave. I was doing both. I was doing the culinary thing and doing Wholesome Wave because I really thought that the philanthropic, nonprofit, community-based organization thing was what was going to meaningfully change the food system. What I've learned in the last 5 years that I've been in this space is that the philanthropic sector is never going to meaningfully change our food system at a scale that's going to make it possible for 66 million people to exercise their free right to choose something as simple as broccoli. It's just not going to happen. Philanthropic sector is constantly changing their mind about what they want to invest their money in. And often, and you know, not out of bad intent, will make a determination of what they believe is the best solution for a serious societal inequity and come up with their solution, and make it a condition of community-based nonprofits to adopt that style of solution, and then they'll give them the money. And this puts these groups in a position, in the place that they call home, who have established trust with underserved community members, understand what poverty looks like in their community, understand what the best possible solutions are in the place that they call home, and they're being given small amounts of money and having their hands tied behind their back. So I'm getting back in the food business. We stole a page out of the Newman's Own playbook. Paul Newman was a partner of mine in one of my many restaurants. I'm very familiar with how the company works. We've decided to come into the scaled food service sector with a specific mission. We've seen in colleges, institutions, hospitals, healthcare systems, large employers like Facebook, LinkedIn, Salesforce, Google, a significant demand for plant-based, plant-forward foods that are responsibly sourced, that meet the values of the eater who's interested in these things, that are delicious, that take into consideration multiple pain points within this scaled food system that just go beyond the conscience of someone to be able to say yes to a product like, you pay your farm workers $47 a day for 15 hours worth of work. Why am I going to buy your tomatoes? So the name of the company is going to be called Wholesome Crave. Well, it is Wholesome Crave, actually. And the way it's going to work is Wholesome Crave is going to start with plant-based, plant-forward soups that we're going to sell. Google is our first customer in Mountain View, California. They have 47,000 people that eat 2.7 meals a day. And they've placed their third and fourth order starting next week. And we anticipate pretty rapid uptake from a variety of other folks in the scaled food service industry. But every time we sell Wholesome Crave soup, 5% of the revenue is going to go to address food insecurity, specifically through incentivizing healthy food purchases. Food banks and donating food to people is definitely one way to address food insecurity. We do believe if there isn't a purchase and there isn't a choice, it's not a market-based solution that can prove that there's a power in being one of those 66 million people who spend $120 billion a year on retail food. So we're trying to create an environment where the transaction of that can turn underserved community members, no matter what position they're in, what they're struggling with that caused them to be in a low-income position, they can still be an enlightened eater and exercise their voice by making the choice and by proving to the rest of the world they're not undereducated as the reason of making the unhealthy food choice. They're not lazy. They don't want to, because they can't walk a mile to a grocery store to buy broccoli that they can't afford. They actually have this power. They want to do the right thing for their family. They just need the economic ability to do that. So that's what Wholesome Crave is going to support. I only have a few minutes, so you can ask questions about the model later or about Wholesome Wave, anything that I've talked about. But what I do want to do, because Will charged me with this, because it's the end of the year, and I know that many of you folks are going to be part of a new movement that's actually going to see, I believe in your lifetime you will see significant change in this food system, and a lot of it's going to be because of the fact that you're taking a vested interest in it. You're learning and skilling yourself up into this movement in a way that's going to create businesses that can make affordable choice economically viable for everybody, so that we don't have to rely on handouts, so that we don't have to rely on donations, so that every American family has an opportunity to have good food on the table for dinner tonight. In the 40 years that I tried to distill down into about 10 minutes, there are 5 things that I've learned. One is, live your values. Live your values. The first time I encountered it, there was a little bit of ego in it. I knew that if I could get the ripe tomatoes and if I could get the best cucumbers and if I could get delicious sweet potatoes, that I could outcompete all the other chefs I was competing with because my food would be more delicious. But it was also, I do know that deep down inside, I couldn't stand feeding anybody something that wouldn't make my mother proud, which was like a really ripe tomato, right? When it actually came to the wall that I hit when Chris was diagnosed, and then I realized I was feeding my customers things I wouldn't feed my family, I took a real risk in 1997 opening what a lot of my friends in the culinary world called my career killer. You're going to do a health food restaurant as your first restaurant in Manhattan. Career suicide. Michel, let us know when you fall on hard times. We'll lend you some money to buy a used car. I could not do Heartbeat Restaurant. I couldn't not do it. I lucked out. The food was good. We got good reviews. It was very successful, but it was a massive risk. But I did that restaurant because I live my values. Don't be afraid to be first. And what I don't mean is don't be afraid to be in first place or the first to do something in a competitive, egocentric way, but a risk-taking, pioneering way. Doing something that there's no template for, that someone's never done before, where you can't seek advice, it's a very, very scary thing. But it's the foundational premise of entrepreneurship is that kind of risk. It's that really believing in your idea enough for the right reasons and living your values that you're going to go out and take that risk. For me, it was a little bit maybe easy because I knew how I could cook, so I would always get a job in a restaurant and get at least one free meal and a paycheck. But that risk is what leads to the types of failure that lead to the learnings that create the valuable iteration, the iterative qualities of thinking that you have to have if you want to be a successful entrepreneur. It's the founding premise of entrepreneurship is being the first at something that hasn't been done before. Nobody to get advice from other than, good luck, I believe in you. And that's actually very valuable. Know what you don't know and enlist those who know it. I'm going to borrow from Reverend King a little bit. The aisles of time are littered with entrepreneurs convinced that all their decisions were right and that for some reason they just didn't get the outcomes they expected, right? That's such bogus thinking. It's just not right. Knowing what you don't know is one of the most important things you'll ever done. I've learned it a few times throughout my career, but as an example for Wholesome Crave, I am not going to be, though I'm the founder of Wholesome Crave, I'm not going to be the CEO of Wholesome Crave. If Wholesome Crave was a restaurant company, even if we were doing 200 or 300 restaurants, I could be the CEO of that. That's my life. I know restaurants. I don't know the scaled food service business. So I'm not the CEO of Wholesome Crave. The former CEO of Newman's Own is the CEO of Wholesome Crave, somebody who actually knows the space and understands the business. Don't get in your own way. And the best way to not get in your own way is know what you don't know and enlist others who do. Don't make your decisions to be in service to the plan, but rather in service to the field. So many entrepreneurs are so concerned about crafting the perfect plan for their vision, so much so that either their train never leaves the station, or by the time the train leaves the station, the environment that the tracks are on have changed and the tracks have shifted and are going to take them to a different place than they were planning to go. And one of two things happens. They either stop the train and wait for environmental conditions to change so that the tracks correct themselves so that they can stick to their plan. Or they stubbornly say, we're going to go there anyway, and then they derail. You can't go back because other entrepreneurs have now left the station with their train. So very, very important. Don't make your decisions to be in service to the plan. Make sure the plan is in service to the field. It always changes. You have to be elastic. You have to be able to shift and move and bob and weave. And finally, don't be afraid to be a beginner. We will learn every single day for the rest of our lives until we draw our last breath. It is that childhood, childlike curiosity, the wonderment of seeing things work, of an idea becoming a reality, things coming to a fruition, people responding in a beautiful way. All of these things come in the mindset of a beginner through the fresh eyes of a child and through an open mind. So as you guys go forward, God bless you all, whoever bless you all, the universe bless you for moving through all of these classes, for opening your mind to learn and respond to a lot of what's going on. Will has shared with me how vigorous the dialogue is, within this cohort of change makers that are going to go out and make the world a better place. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time. Was that all right? Okay.
Let's go over here. Thank you.
I hope I didn't talk too much. I'm good at it.
We didn't assign you a reading or a question this week, but I hope you have some.
Okay.
Because we'd like to continue this. This class, as many of you know, began in the journalism school here at Berkeley, and then it migrated for a year or two to the College of Natural Resources, and then this is the third year here in the business school. And many of you know that I've been an entrepreneur, so I'm wanted to share with you kind of as we finish the semester. And you remember last week we had such an interesting discussion with 5 relatively early stage companies doing different things. But I wanted to bring you, to finish the semester, somebody who I really think embodies this spirit of entrepreneurship. And I feel strongly that there's a difference between being a founder and being entrepreneurial, like being an entrepreneurial founder and being an entrepreneur and being entrepreneurial.
Right. Yes.
I think everybody can be entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial means being resourceful. And entrepreneurship is actually more about mitigating risks than it is about taking risks. And you framed this, I love this, you said, don't be afraid to be first. But in going out to be first, I noticed how many people you talk to
Oh, yeah.
who have done something maybe similar or have been where you want to go, and you're like just a sponge. So basically, successful entrepreneurs are constantly de-risking the opportunity rather than expanding the risk of the opportunity. And the other thing that you said that I want to talk about is you mentioned that you had always could fall back on being a cook.
Yes.
That's huge, to be an entrepreneur and have. I always, whenever I'm talking to young entrepreneurs, or even in my own life, I've said to myself, the key to being a successful entrepreneur is to keep your overhead low. And so as soon as I would see a Silicon Valley entrepreneur with a big idea and a little bit of progress buy himself a new car, like a fancy car, I thought, that would be a sign for me. I'm not going to invest in that company because I immediately see somebody getting ahead of themselves with their overhead. So in life, if you want to be a change maker, if you want to be able to take risks, keep your overhead low, which means, don't get attached to a lot of fancy stuff. Focus on really what matters.
Yes. And learn how to cook, you'll eat.
Well, I was just going to say, that's so true. You kind of tossed that aside, but I wanted to. Yeah. There's something in the back of your head that says, even if this fails completely, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And I think figuring out how to get to that place in your own life liberates one to go out and do the work that needs to be done and to take the chances and put oneself out there. So I've seen you now do that, over and over again. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So de-risking and then also having a safety net.
And I think what I'd like to riff on is when you said, going out and, looking to an endeavor and then seeking, friends and allies and advice and trying to work and think through to de-risk is also, again, part of knowing what you don't know. There's so many things that I don't know. I was, fortunate to barely graduate high school. I got through it, but I didn't have, which is, horrible timing. My mom and dad both fell on pretty hard times right when I was graduating high school. My older brother and I were out because they had to downsize. We had a younger brother and a sister. And my mom said, you can cook, get a job in a restaurant, at least you'll eat. So that was, the beginning of it. But, I just, every moment from that first moment when I flipped my first set of eggs in a breakfast truck stop to, the day we hung the clothes shingle out on the doors of dressing room to really go all in on Wholesome Wave, I think I can look back on all of it and say that I mentioned two specific mentors, but I had to have had many, many dozens. And don't think of a mentor as, I don't like to think of a mentor as someone it's like a mentorship for life. It can be a brief engagement with someone who really has a profound impact on your thinking, and you might only have connected with them for 3 months of your entire career, but they have brought you a nugget of learning that is just, it becomes, something that's part of the rest of your life.
One of the things that you exude too that I wish was in the Haas defining principles, but there's something about your generosity. And I think that certainly generosity and special hospitality go together. That's sort of a warmth and generosity. But I think the other thing in life is coming into relationships, into opportunities with the spirit of generosity as opposed to, what can I get out of this? You are a person that is always sort of thinking like, what can I give or what can I contribute to make that better? And I see when I look at you, I see that generosity manifesting itself as an energy that other people want to reciprocate.
Oh.
So when you go ask for help, people want to help you because you've helped other people. So I think this is sort of like a defining principle. We don't talk about it a lot, but we talk about it on a balance sheet in business as goodwill. You assign this sort of magical, invisible quality to this line item on your financial statements that says goodwill. But goodwill is incredibly valuable, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur, because you're going out there and you're asking people to, you don't have money, you don't have resources, you can't pay everybody for everything you need. You're asking them to help you. And in my experience, people are much more likely to help you if you've been helpful. And it doesn't have to be transactional like with the same person, but
No, but it is an active exchange, though. Otherwise, it's not genuine.
Right.
You can talk about goodwill, you can market goodwill, you can language goodwill. There are all kinds of things that you can do to express a value proposition of goodwill within your business model. But investors, stakeholder partners in the field, competitors who sometimes can actually make really incredible allies. You got to go beyond a sniff test, and it is an active exchange. It's not transactional, and it does need to be genuine. Otherwise, it's not authentic, right? So it's just, and I think again, I'm lucky because when you actually feed people for a living, or farmers, growing, stewarding land, raising plants, caring for animals, dealing with disease and blight and all of the, they're doing all of that stuff for the moment that they see somebody eating their ripe tomato, and there's this genuine hospitality thing that comes along with it, a feeling of responsibility. Farmers, clearly, most farmers, unless they're very large scale, they're not in it for the money.
Well,
and most people who cook aren't either. It's just, I think it might be a gene. I hope it's, or whatever it might, but I hope that it is, that it's learnable.
Maybe CRISPR can identify it.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
No,
but
I'm kidding.
No, it's just, but you got to want to give somebody something,
but
not expect something in return.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to be the spirit of generosity is a source of energy. I mean, it's a principle in life, and in some traditions it's called karma.
I like karma.
Yeah.
It works for me.
I
understand basically how it works. I'm trying to stay on the good side of it.
You generate karma, yeah, and hopefully it conspires in your favor.
Yeah.
At a certain point. But this idea of being, in service to something bigger, not just the plan, and that really, connects to that kind of mission and sense of purpose. And so in starting this new endeavor, one thing I'd love to go back on, and please, if you have a question, come to one of these mics or come down, because we want to make this more of a discussion. I'm just kind of trying to catch up while you guys come up with your questions. So.
I've bored everybody so thoroughly they have no questions.
No, great. No, we've actually got a question.
Oh, we have a question.
Are you ready, Emily?
That was my style of a throwdown.
You go. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Lift that up toward your face and tell us who you are. And
Okay. Hi, I'm Emily.
Hi, Emily.
Major is MCB, or molecular and cell biology.
Yeah, because when you said MCB before, it took me a few minutes to figure out what you meant.
Acronyms, yeah. And I'm focusing on genetics in the major. So my question is, when you talked about knowing what you don't know, where do you draw the line between delegating and finding people to do those things you don't know, or taking on the task and learning it yourself?
That's an excellent question. Delegating is probably one of my most prolific areas where I get to fail and learn from my mistakes. You know, I think, you know, when you're whatever family is forming around the work that you're trying to do, there's going to be delegation. Obviously, interviewing processes and having real meaningful conversations beyond your standard job interview and the standard questions of how long people have stayed at whatever it might be. And credentials, getting a feel for the person that you're delegating to, if there's a sense of shared values is very, very important in establishing the trust that you need to be able to delegate to them, even though you're not convinced they're going to be able to do it exactly the way it should be done, not exactly the way that you would do it. Because I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make in deciding not to delegate, is that I'm not sure this person is going to do it the way I would do it. Honestly, the way that you would do it, you gotta wake up and look in the mirror and understand that that might actually not be the best way. And sometimes you're only going to learn that by delegating to someone who isn't going to do it exactly the way that you did it. Early in my career, that would piss me off. It would make me mad. And until I finally didn't catch a delegated responsibility that I gave off, and things actually went better. And I had to have the look in the mirror moment, because I was angry that it wasn't being done my way. I couldn't deny that the outcome was far better than it would have been if it was done my way. And I was in my 20s at the time, but I was a chef of a restaurant. And, you know, so you got to make your best choice to build team and build family. But the only way that team and family is going to have a shared sense of ownership is if you trust them and you delegate and you let it go. I mean, you've got to be able to put some kind of points of pause where you can check in and actually see if what's happening is working out. But
Michel?
I don't like to overprescribe.
One other way.
I don't know if that does that make sense.
Let me.
Is that helpful at all?
Let me take it in a little different direction.
Okay, do it.
Because I think what I heard in your question a little bit was like, what's the core kernel of knowledge that you need to know and go and know? What's the expertise that you need to have to be credible and effective? And so when
in delegating or just in general?
Just in terms of, I think when you're like building an enterprise, when you're going out and getting other expertise, like we had the Trace Genomics founder here last week, and she's got a PhD in genomics and plant biology, and so she had like a core scientific understanding. You have a deep understanding as a chef of how something goes from a farm to a plate, and making it, delicious and craveable. And so that's not, if you were going to start a restaurant, that you're not delegating that knowledge to somebody else.
Right.
So as you start Wholesome Crave, I see you starting with the assumption that the only way this company thrives and grows to create the kinds of revenues that make a meaningful impact for Wholesome Waves work is to have incredibly delicious soups.
Absolutely.
So you're saying like, I'm not the CEO, but you're the designer.
Yeah, of the soup.
Of the soup.
No, CEO can't touch my soup.
So he's not like, he's not delegating.
Get your fingers out of the pot.
He can delegate. He can delegate the responsibility of like who's going to go sell it and who's going to maybe scale it up, but not that core.
Yeah,
piece.
and I think, but that's where, so Will has been helping me with this, and he is a mentor of mine, big time. Can't tell you guys how fortunate you are. to be able to tap into his mind. But I like the CEO position specifically, I had to delegate that off because I don't know how to make that train run on time. And before I made the decision, there was a lot of talking and searching. The business is going to evolve. Another aspect of delegating is what are the tasks that need to be done that you're lacking, skill sets or competencies within your organization for this specific moment in time, because it's going to change, right?
Right.
I mean, businesses scale, mistakes, whatever, you have to pivot and you have to bob and weave and stuff, and it's constantly an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you for that
Anyway,
question.
that's a great question.
Hannah.
You asked me what
Nice
time
to
it is.
see
I'll tell
you.
you how a watch
So nice
is
to
built.
be here.
Yeah.
As usual.
Yeah.
I just have two quick questions.
Sure.
One is why soup? I'm just curious how that
Why soup?
Okay,
idea
right.
came about. Yeah. And then the other is I have a special interest in hospital food. And you mentioned that
Yes.
in the group of folks who may be interested in
Oh, cool.
in
Awesome.
this. And I just wondered if you had enough interaction at this point to speak a little bit to what you've discovered. I've always been interested in changing that system, and also kind of fascinated at how it tends to stay down the ladder of shifting arenas in the food system, and kind of always scratching my head, why is that? Because here's this amazing opportunity to really shift the food system in amazing ways and heal people. I mean, the contradictions are pretty magnified in that space. So I just wondered if you had had enough interaction.
So why soup? Soup, if you're running a restaurant and feeding a couple of hundred people a day, is an awesome economic opportunity to address potential food waste. All of the things that, scraps and trimmings and this and that, frankly, a lot of restaurants just kind of pitch. There are a lot of restaurants that are that size that buy soup, and then they throw a lot of stuff away because they don't want to deal with their scraps. But it's really an awesome economic opportunity to deal with waste. When you're feeding 35,000 people, it's one of the most expensive endeavors to make. So think about, Google in Mountain View has 45,000 people that eat 2.7 meals a day. If you need a beef stock, a chicken stock, a fish stock, a vegetable stock. All of these stocks have to be made and prepped, and there are some things that go into those stocks other than bones or scraps. Actually, you're using whole vegetables when you're feeding that many people. You have to heat those stocks, cool them down, refrigerate them, draw them back out, do all the prep and the mise en place to make a chicken soup, a beef soup, a fish soup, vegetarian soup, get them all heated up in very, very large footprint, energy-intensive containers, constantly watched by a staff, cooled down to HACCP regulations, refrigerated again, very expensive storage space, refrigeration space, and then you have to slack it back out and push it out to all of your outlets to feed the 45,000 people. It's expensive. Google built a 65,000 square foot facility to prepare the majority of their food from scratch. If they included soup, they decided not to include soup. It would have to be almost 100,000 square foot facility to do one item on the appetizer menu. It's super space intensive and very labor intensive. So it's a big opportunity to really help these facilities get a credibly sourced product that's healthful and delicious and save them the intensity of, and soup is very popular. So that's why soup. Big unmet demand gap, whether plant-based or not, even delicious or not, just having soup that you can heat up and serve is a big deal for these institutions. Remind me the second.
Hospitals.
Hospitals. It's interesting, when I did Heartbeat Restaurant and then I did Pure Restaurant in India, I knew from the research that I was doing, because and thank you for making the point, because I never mentioned this. All of the people that I was asking, I'm like, I'm going to do this restaurant of well-being. All my wife's friends, friends of mine in the restaurant business, employees of mine who are feeding their families. The whole notion around when you think of healthy food, what do you think of? And a lot of people would say, oh, vegetarian. Oh, if you're going to do healthy food, you got to do vegan. And when we didn't have a lot of these other ingredients, and we actually weren't even using coconut oil, because at the time, the science said that if you eat saturated fat, it's not good for you. Coconut oil is high in saturated fats, but it also has balancing monounsaturates. But anyway, it's just like, how do you make stuff delicious? I learned how to do that. And antithetical to what a lot of people think, it's like if you're not going to be cooking with a lot of fats that mask flavors, you're going to need to use more ingredients and seasonings. You actually use less of everything, way less of everything. It's really important that the core ingredient is spectacular, but you're using less of all of the other stuff. So it's interesting, our first 5 SKUs of soups are 100% plant-based, non-allergenic. 3 of them are low sodium. They're below 400 milligrams of sodium for a 10-ounce serving. And it blows the minds of everybody that's tasted the soup, because they're like, this can't be low sodium. And it's like, we know how to do this. Have 2 restaurants for 10 years where you're, half of your items are vegetarian and 2/3 of those are vegan. You learn how to make stuff delicious if you want people filling the seats so you can do the revenue you need to be successful. So we've figured that out, and that's the trade secret that we're not going to be generous with for a little while. Eventually it'll be inevitable and we'll share it. But when I look at hospital food service, it's a leviathan, and the economics of what it costs and what hospitals are willing to pay to spend on the food they're feeding their employees and their patients isn't really enough, to motivate the supply chain to change. So we're kind of taking it, we'll go for soup first, and then we'll go into prepared entrees, and we'll go into other, sectors on the menu, and take it a piece at a time, and then learn what we can about how other ways we can help them change the economic quotient that just makes it more possible for them to afford to continually improve what they're offering. Because right now, it is pretty abysmal.
You have a question? Thank you. Thanks, Hannah.
Hi,
Thanks.
I'm Sophia. I'm a grad student here studying water purification. And I have one question related to the soup. So one, I was just wondering how you're planning to source things for the soup and how much of a role that's playing in your business design. And then also, I think you mentioned like a 5% return to help kind of food accessibility and that kind of stuff. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you're planning to give back and improve food accessibility.
Okay, got
with
it,
the
sure.
business.
Okay, so sourcing, very important to us. Thankfully, because of companies like Amy's and Annie's, Whole Foods, et cetera, the number of mid to large scale farms that actually grow organic carrots and organic butternut squash and things like that, there are more of them now than ever before. There simply are not enough. We intend to create the type of pressure that allows more of that to happen. One of the things that we're considering, should talk about the Row 7 thing, do you think?
Yeah, if you want to,
right?
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Charlotte Douglas was here earlier this semester.
Oh, she, yeah. So
they know about Row 7.
Yeah, when we look at some of the agricultural producers that we're going to be sourcing from that are already growing things organically, the opportunity to have them buy Row 7 seeds, so that we can look at crops that are hybridized for flavor, but also for maximum yield, so you can use 100% of the plant. Right now, Sweet Greens is doing that with Row 7 seeds because they partner with local producers, more small to mid-sized farmers, but they're getting them to plant Row 7 stuff so that they can promote that on their menu. In the size of system that we're in, we're intending to see row 7 to really be in the weeds to provide the seeds necessary that could fulfill that demand. So we're going to be very intentional about the way that we source, realizing that there simply isn't enough of the type of land and production that we need to have all of our soups in this size of a system be 100% biodynamic, organic, and farmed by groups like the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. But what we intend to do is create the market demand and also the kind of social and digital marketing and awareness stuff that actually drives even more energy towards convincing the supply chain to make more changes. So that's something that we're definitely going to be focusing in on.
And talk a little bit about how Wholesome Wave works.
Yeah, got it.
How will Wholesome Crave's
Right.
stream of revenues enhance Wholesome Wave's ability to do its work in accessibility?
That's one of my favorite questions. Oh, thank you. Ooh, you know, Will has some of the most delicious stuff growing in his backyard.
This isn't it.
And his front yard, and his side yard, just growing everywhere. Every once in a while, it's in your house too. Anyway, what we've been able to do with Wholesome Wave on a very limited budget has been pretty remarkable. So we reached almost 1 million people last year, and the $5 to $6 million budget that we have is highly restricted because it's philanthropic dollars. Newman's Own, as a food company, does about $350 million a year, and in 2.5 decades has given away $500 million to charity as a result of their model. We intend to be at least a $350 million company. So when we look at 5% off the top, so it's not taxed off the top, that's $18 million going to an organization that on $6 million that's heavily restricted changed federal policy. So $18 million unrestricted, it's almost like a 6 to 8 times. It's not triple, it's more than that because it's unrestricted.
I want to be like the color commentator on the sports channel, you know, like whispering on the side, like, did you see that? That was like confidence without attitude. But did you hear like $350 million company? Are you kidding me? That's amazing. Like, that's like, I like to call that pathological optimism.
It is pathological.
Like, they see it. You know, like, this company is like 3 months old. It's shipped 3 orders. And he's already talking about $350 million.
Is it? So anyway.
No.
He's embarrassing me.
Well, I'm not embarrassing you.
I'm peeling a citrus.
No, but I wanted this class to be about like getting inside the mind of an entrepreneur, because you see that the entrepreneur has a clear vision of what has not manifested yet. And he's speaking it as if it's going to happen. And I believe that the ability to do that, to see the future, but then also to be very credible, because you know it's one step at a time, and you've built Wholesome Wave to be credible, you know, and delivering on what you promise while setting an ambitious agenda is exciting, because you want to move. I mean, we're all in this because we want to move the needle. And what I wanted to introduce to you tonight was this idea of this virtuous cycle of edible entrepreneurship. And we've been, you know, again in the candor department, as we've been developing the stakeholder and the shareholder investor base for this company, there are people that really get this idea that actually this is about systems change. And a lot of people that are in business, just because the way business works in a capitalistic society, it's about profit maximization. So as soon as you say you're giving away 5% of the revenues, you know, you're reducing the net revenues by 5%, which means you're going to reduce the profit. Then all of a sudden people think, oh, well, this company's not going to be as profitable as another company that I might invest in, like Beyond Meat. No, they're not profitable. That was a facetious joke. But my point is that what we're trying to do also is push the envelope in terms of what matters in a business. Yeah. And can we create models, and can we attract an ecosystem of partners that want to participate in a bigger vision and that would be interested in being satisfied with the kind of financial return that this company will generate, which is planned to be robust and positive, while having this systemic impact on, with direct relationship with this nonprofit. So this is an experiment, but there are a lot of different models. One of the other models that I've worked with a lot is a company called Revolution Foods.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Which was actually founded right here at Berkeley and actually was started by 2 students in my class about 12 years ago. But in that model, they're bringing healthy, natural food to schools. And they started with one charter school in Oakland. And I remember very vividly, they made 60 lunches a day, and now they serve over 3 million meals a week. They're really having a meaningful impact. It's a for-profit company, but like all food companies, it functions on a relatively small margin. And the school lunch, the hospital channel is difficult. It's always been difficult. So
it's cash starved too.
Yeah, and so innovating around supply chain, not just, so innovative sources of ingredients, innovative partners that want to participate. And, it's an interesting conversation to have with people about the bigger context of what we're trying to do, and not only shift the way people are thinking about the food system, but also shifting the way they're actually thinking about deploying their capital.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, for the food system to be equitable and accessible, I go back to what Bob Kennard told us a couple weeks ago. He said, when did it all become about profit and a business? And as you talk about
food,
eating, food. So I'm hoping, one of the reasons I'm participating in this is to nudge a model. One of the reasons I was so excited to be involved with Revolution Foods was to show that you can create a market-based solution that can scale and be successful as a business and attract mainstream capital. But the risks are still that we have these really outsized expectations for these new companies. We had big expectations for Blue Apron. We've got really big expectations for Beyond Meat. We'll soon have big expectations for Impossible Burger, which you met last week. And food takes time to have an impact and to change. We need a longer time horizon.
Well, there's this massive infrastructure that is a result of decades of investment, not out of evil intent. I mean, it was really, World War I was actually once called the war to end all wars. Nobody could imagine after that horrible thing had happened that it would ever happen again, and they tried a multitude of things from global policy perspectives to try to prevent it from happening, and within a couple of decades it happened again. And the assessment really was, the Allied side prevailed twice in those conflicts because they could produce, process, field, and deliver more food, fuel, and ammunition than the other side. And once World War II happened, everybody was convinced World War III was right around the corner. So what do we really need to go all in on from a public-private policy perspective and from a citizen perspective? And that was whoever is going to be able to produce, process, store, and preserve and stockpile the most food and ammunition is going to prevail. So for the first time, one of the first times in the history of our country, voters, for-profit companies, policymakers were all aligned on, we've got to change the way we do we got to produce as much food as we can. It's a miracle that we can actually put food in a condition where it can stay fresh for 10 years, fresh for 10 years. We had no idea what the impact was going to be of highly processed carbohydrates on human health at the time. All we knew is that this was a miracle, and by the way, by also creating this security for ourselves and for the allies, we can feed the world. Now that we know what we know, we can say there's plenty of evil intent involved, but it wasn't designed out of evil intent. But that system exists today, and it needs to be unwound. And the one thing that I encourage all of you not to do is to expect us to be able to yell louder and snap our fingers more and get more and more demanding and expect meaningful change within the next year. It is messy, and it is entrenched, and billions of people rely on it to eat at all.
You're going to use that mic because
Yeah.
your mic.
I'm running out of battery.
might be
But yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's, having the right-sized expectation, but also expecting big things of yourselves as entrepreneurs because you're the leaders of it. So in speaking to, what you're talking about, Wholesome Wave was an experiment, right? And I do remember because it was, Michael Pollan and Joan Gussow both said when I was describing what I thought Wholesome Wave was hopefully going to become, I remember them listening to the concept and saying, Michel, this is amazing. Your wonderful things are going to happen. You're working with Gus. You've got a really great team. We know how you are. We just don't want you to be heartbroken when you never see policy change. So to me, that was the big audacious thing that we were looking to do that actually happened. And a lot of it was luck. I mean, honest to God, a lot of it was luck. And it was also, and I'm making this point because this is where I see the real potential impact actually for Wholesome Crave, is that we Johnny Appleseeded the thing. Wholesome Wave never went into a community and said, we're Wholesome Wave. We know you have problems in your community, and we're going to bring your community the solution to your community's problems. We never did that. We realized that whether you're in northern Maine, western Alabama, Compton in Los Angeles, or North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago, the only thing those four communities have in common is poverty. The way the poverty looks in those places that they call home, very different. To us, the notion of providing affordability, 2-for-1 fruit and vegetable sale, think about it. Haitian, Laotian, Croatian, Appalachian, everybody understands 2-for-1. So it's what we would do is go to a community, wow, you guys have problems. You're the organization that has established trust. You're the guys who are doing the most innovative things, rubbing a couple of toothpicks together, MacGyvering a solution. We've got an idea. If you like it, and we have some seed money, let's raise some more money together. We'll teach you guys how to manage the money because it is an incentive. It is cash. You have to be a nonprofit, but now you're a cashier. You have to responsibly have a back of the house that's set up to handle the money. And you have to collect and share with us the data, the way that we're asking you to do the data so that we can make the case for the policy change. Call it whatever you want. Run it however you want. The size of the incentives in your community are based on the money that we can raise and what you think is enough to motivate someone who's struggling with poverty to make a healthier food choice. And please just, if you run across something that's a really good idea, share that with us so that we can push it back out to all of our other partners so that everybody doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. So it really was a Johnny Appleseed. I believe with Wholesome Crave, and it gets back to your question, really, because 5% of even, if it was a $500 million company, is only $25 million a year is not going to reach 66 million people who eat every single day. But the practice of taking a specific promised amount of your revenue and giving it to a very specific cause that's addressing a very specific problem is new to the for-profit community. So many groups that are in the food business say, oh, we're philanthropic, we give back, because they donate stuff that they're about to throw away to a food bank. And that's the extent of about 80% of the philanthropy in food production is giving away stuff that you know you're gonna have to throw away. That's great for food waste, but it's also a handout, and it's not a choice for the people who end up eating that food. So to teach somebody so like with Wholesome Wave, because there are numerous organizations now that do their own incentive programs, aren't part of our network. You know, eventually we're going to close the doors on Doubling SNAP because there's so many great organizations doing it. We don't need to be in that business anymore. That's what needs to happen in the for-profit world. We want to show people that if you can do that, people are going to want to invest in you. You know, if you guys are aspiring to be entrepreneurial and have meaningful careers, look for companies that do this kind of stuff. And those are the companies that are going to end up with the best workforce, you know, because everybody wants to work and do something with an organization or lead an organization that really does mean something. So it's kind of like what my mom always said. Mean what you say and do it. You know?
That's a great note to end on.
Sorry.
Mean what you say
And do it.
and do it.
Yeah, actually.
Let's have a big hand for Michel. I wanted to leave you all with one more thing this year. This has been a real honor to lead this class. And again, I just thought I would leave you with a poem by Wendell Berry, who is, many of you know, a farmer and a poet and a philosopher and a great spokesman for the food movement, and somebody we kind of cherish and whose presence is sort of always part of our work. So I thought maybe I'd just leave you this semester with this poem, and then we'll ask you to participate in the, turn it over to Victoria, and she can lead the evaluation and the update, and then I'll see you next year. Make a place to sit down. Make a place to sit down. Sit down. Be quiet. You must depend upon affection, reading, knowledge, skill, more of each than you have, inspiration, work, growing older, patience, for patience joins time to eternity. Any readers who like your poems, doubt their judgment. Breathe with unconditional breath, the unconditioned air. Shun electric wire. Communicate slowly. Live a three-dimensional life. Stay away from screens. Stay away from anything that observes the place it is in. There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. Accept what comes from silence. Make the best you can of it. Of the little words that come out of the silence, like prayers prayed back to the one who prays, make a poem that does not disturb the silence from which it came. Have a great summer.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Okay, so I have a few announcements. There is a Kahoot, then there are course evaluations for you all to do, and then you guys are free to come up and grab stuff from our mini farmers market here. Announcements, grades are still up to date with everything except for an excused absence. which I will do by this Friday. SA2 office hours, that stuff is the same. SA2 is due May 15th, 11:59 p.m., but don't forget, you can submit earlier. Office hours are posted, so